All right, I hope that this is working. I've never done a video like this before. I was intending to present this to the class, but we have obviously moved online, so I'm going to do it like this, which is a bit of a shame. But I'll be talking about fractal time, so we can define fractal in this way with two provisional definitions. Um, the first is that something that is fractal is self-similar across scales, or is to say scale invariant. Um, and then the second one is zooming in provides more and more detail. Like if you take a coastline, you can zoom in more and more and more and more, and the more detail provided, the more the more you zoom in, the more detail that is provided, to an infinite degree in the case of coastlines. So there's some mathematical models for a fractal structure. You can see in this one where it has these long, anytime there's a flat surface, it creates one of these diamonds out of it. And each new diamond, or triangle rather, has two flat sections, and this can go on infinitely. And you can zoom in, you can keep zooming in, and it makes this fuzzy snowflake kind of shape. And you can do that infinitely, obviously. And the next one, this is the always fun to look at. Um, this is a Mandelbrot series fractal design. You can find really nice videos on YouTube where they do 4K zooms of with these supercomputers essentially. But it's a structure which will go on and on infinitely in with its own proportions. So it's time to get into things a little bit now. Um, One of the first concepts is a nested structure is something which is its own whole, but it fits into a larger structure, like similar to this nesting doll. Um, like it says, like I say here, most things which are fractal are nested structures. Musical notes in the harmonic overtone series, we'll see a picture of that in a minute, and the way that our descriptions of time relate to one another is a nested structure. And obviously the nested doll. So this is what I was talking about with harmonic overtone as a fractal nested coupling. It's nested in that we can follow any of these lines, and while they're their own frequency, take this if this were um, A, the note A at 440 hertz. Um, and the span of this would be 440, and this one would be 220, and you can subdivide that infinitely. Um, So there's a lot to look at with this one. I think it's really neat. Normally, it originally goes up, right? But I've moved it sideways for this. So we have to talk about quantum physics a little bit to contextualize some stuff in the future. Um, so the first thing, we're only going to, it's only a little, small aside in quantum physics. Um, but the first one is the double slit experiment, where this is the quantum physics experiment. Um, so you can see here, with one or both detectors turned on, they the particles act as if they were particles. They go into one of these holes, which is the you fire photons from here, and then there's a slit with these detectors. And whether or not the detectors are on, that's the only variable here, will determine whether or not they act like a photon or like a wave. This pattern here is called a wave pattern. Interference pattern, because when you're not observing which slit the particle goes through, it acts as if it were a wave. So, and then this one is actually the same experiment. It's quite a bit more complicated though. So I I don't even understand a lot of this, but this is the series of mirrors that they have used um, to let's see, let me get my mouse so that it will show the whole thing. This is the series of mirrors where what these um, what these people tried to do is they tried to trick the particle into revealing itself at a time when it shouldn't have, because they were really trying to tease out whether or not it's the act of measuring the the slit which changes the interference pattern or not. And using this elaborate series of mirrors, they determined that it is in fact the way that you look at it, which changes its respective interference or rather lack thereof. So here are takeaways, and the most important stuff. Particles behave differently when they are perceived. Particles engage with time very differently than we do. I might have glossed over that a little bit. Where the the puzzling thing about this is the fact that um, they used these mirrors to try to. It's called a delayed choice. Um, because they tried to use mirrors, but the the particle will always know if if anyone is ever going to look. I say no with it will know in quotations. It will you cannot trick a particle to revealing itself because it always knows if it will ever be perceived. So this is a really tough topic for people, but it's called acausal relationships, or sorry, atemporal relationships, and reverse retrocausality. All right, now it gets into the really complicated stuff. Um, so from my primary source researcher and polymath, Susie Vorbel, hopefully it's Vorbel, I have a few quotes and we'll just dive into these. Um, so the first one, quantum mechanics suggested that there are no independent observers, but only observer participants who generate reality by taking a measurement which induces the collapse of the wave function. So the key, I think the operant word here is generate reality, and we'll talk a little more about that in particular, but this is kind of a little bit of context for what we'll be talking about basically in the next couple of slides. Um, and here we have time is not a purely subjective phenomenon generated by observers, but although the observer does not generate time, he may modify its structure, which may be understood as an interference pattern resulting from the observer's embedding in a context. And we'll talk about the what it means to be embedded in a context in a moment. So I think the key words here are modify its structure, and we do so with perception. And we'll talk. This is all going to come full circle. So we continue with the internal complexity of the observer is a constraint on our generation of reality, and the perspective from which we construct models. Embodied cognition implies that we have to take account both the observer's internal differentiation and the degree to which he is embedded into a context, i.e., his degree of involvement and participation. So, we this basically means that one's state of consciousness, and how much they are again embedded into a context, and how involved you are with one's awareness will determine your basically your perception of time. And this always reminds me of a so we have another quote. In the background of our perspective, we arrange for otherwise isolated events to be connected into a before and after relation. If there were no temporal framework or context to provide simultaneity, no before and after relations, and therefore no correlated succession would be conceivable for any temporal change in or around us. So we really do a lot to track causal relationships and structures. There's a large part of our brain dedicated to tracking and trying to create a smooth picture of what's been going on around us. So here we have a couple of terms from Edmund Husserl and his phenomenology. We'll define these concepts as some of the ways that we relate to time. So first one is pretension, is our immediate memory of events. And this might relate to the previous all of it could fluctuate. And I have a diagram in just a moment that we'll see, which is a really nice visualization of that. And protension is the same thing, but in our immediate future. Um, the easiest example I have of this is the way that we interact with our objects in our environment, and we anticipate their gravitational movement. Um, you'll when you're interacting with things, you'll notice that you'll do things because you've been trained to know that they will act a certain way with the Earth's gravitational field, and lots of things like that. So I'll come back. So this is the memory I was talking about. It's kind of hard, a little bit fuzzy, but you can see this one is pretension and this is protension. So um, by this structure, we'll just examine this one part. So we have where we have in this smaller circle, imagine that the current moment is about right here, in this bubble at least. Um, our short-term memory with our projections of the future create our experience. So, loop. Um, Backing up a bit, the consciousness of the present, the now, is the place where memory anticipation, the potential culmination of all retentions and protensions. It holds past events by locating them in their fixed positions, fixed with respect to before and after relations, and represents them in a modified way within the present now. Thus, we create simultaneity of retention, the consciousness of the present, and protension. And then there's this, and you can see that this is a nesting coupled kind of structure, because within this gray is another pretension, and within this gray is again another pretension. So in this way, we can see the way that they explain it in the book Fractal Time is that you could have multiple experiences of any given moment. So this would be you're on a train, drinking a cup of coffee, reading a book, and that the way that these all interact with one another is any given experience of any moment. So to summarize things, time is fractal because our nested nows are self-similar across scales. This is what this is all about. Where our memories and anticipation meet are nested couplings. Again, back to this. One state of consciousness, or embedded in context, determines their experience of time and layers of the now, capital N, in which they reside, and we are able to modify the structure of time with our engagement. We are constantly contextualizing our experience in order to keep track of phenomena which we perceive to be causally related. Okay, and that's all I have on this. Okay.